Hello students, welcome to another government lesson. In our last lesson, we discussed on political socialization / political culture. In that lesson, we looked at the definition of politics, and we said politics is actually a process in which power is acquired in order to control the resources in a given political system. And we've also looked at the definition of political culture and political socialization. We've also looked at the components of political culture, which we say cognitive orientation, we have evaluative orientation, and then we have affective orientation. We were able to also look at the agents of political socialization. All right. At the end of that lesson, I gave you an assignment, which I hope most of you have done it now. Now, the assignment says we are to look at the various factors that can actually enhance the political or the electoral performance of a given political system. Now, in that assignment, what you are expected to do is just look at some factors that can actually help a political party in a given political system to thrive. Now, what are some of these factors that you are expected to explain? One of it is unity among members of a given political party. All right, that's one of it. Another thing that you should also explain is funds. Every political party needs money in order to run its different activities. 2, leadership. Every political party with vibrant leadership can actually help that political party to perform credibly. Another thing you need to look at is past records of the political party. Now, just allow me to say some things. Now, when Obasanjo came into power, Obasanjo actually spent 2 tenures. For me, I will tell you that his past record in the first tenure was actually one of the things that paved the way for him to come for the second term. Now, just look at it. Every political party that has actually done well, of course, those records stand for that political party as an advantage over other political parties. Now, just look at the rest of them. But this is what is actually expected of you. Now, in today's lesson, we shall be discussing on African Union, AU. African Union, AU. Now, what we hope to achieve in this lesson, one of it is to explain the origin of African Union. 2, to state at least 5 objectives of AU, discuss 4 achievements of AU, and lastly to state some of the problems of AU. Now let's look at the origin of African Union. I would love you to pay attention to some of the things I will be writing, some of the dates and names of persons that will actually help you to trace the origin of the African Union. Now, before it became African Union, it was called Organization of African Unity. It was OAU initially, but with time, it became the African Union. So I want us to just go through the history of the AU. Now, in the 1900, there is what we call the Pan-African movement. We discussed Pan-African movement with you. Now, this movement was to look at the plight of the African man, and to also, devise ways or to put down modalities to to see how the African man will be liberated from the powers and the shackles of the colonial masters. Now, it was started by some few individuals, people like Marcus Garvey, people like Du Bois, W.E. Du Bois, people like Patmore Judge, yes, and yeah, these were the founding fathers of the Pan-African movement. And these Africans were actually in abroad and started this movement, discussion on different activities that could actually lead to the liberation or the independence of the different African territories. Now, there were other congresses, like the Congress in 1919 during the First World War. We have another in 1945. That was during the Second World War, and that was the last that was actually held. But apart from this, there were other congresses that were held by the Pan-African movement. Now just look at it. During the 1945 Congress of the Pan-African movement, other African leaders were brought in. You know, like like Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya. People like Ladoke Akintola of Nigeria. And then we have people like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, where the African leaders that also joined in the movement, the Pan-African movement. Now, during the 1945, Manchester it was actually held in Manchester. During this meeting, several African leaders actually joined in the movement and started advocating for the liberation of the African territories. Now, there were other congresses after the 1945 Congress. Congresses like the one that took place in 1960. By 1958 first. By 1958, we're having just nine African territories that were liberated, they were independent. Just 9 territories. By 1960, about 60/61, about 20 territories were independent. 20 African territories were liberated from the colonial shackles. Now, it moved on to 1962. And then the last one took place in 1963. In fact, let me just give some explanation to this. Alright, by 1962, there were many African countries, many African territories, that were actually liberated, that became independent. Now, just pay attention quickly. In these independent African territories started advocating for the total decolonization of African territories. Now, it actually led to the division of the independent African territories. These newly independent countries of Africa were actually divided. Divided on what? Now, divided on the mode of decolonization. One of the factions was called the Casablanca. the Casablanca bloc. Another one was called the Brazzaville. Alright, now the Casablanca bloc was advocating for radical decolonization of the African territories. Radical decolonization, that is, fight until you are liberated from the colonial masters. But the Brazzaville said, no. We must not fight. At least we've come a long way. Why can't we just imbibe a culture that is gradual? Let's just do it gradually. Let's get ourselves liberated gradually from the colonial masters. But that was not the case with Casablanca. And then there was another bloc that came out of Brazzaville, and it was called the Monrovia. The Monrovia group was also a moderate group. It also advocates for the gradual decolonization of the different African territories. Alright. It was as a result of this little friction that came between, among the independent African countries that led to the formation of the OAU. Now, in 1963, precisely 22nd to the 25th of May, an emperor from Ethiopia, that is, Emperor Haile Selassie. In fact, sometimes we hear reggae musicians talking about him. He actually summoned a meeting between 22nd to 25th of May 1963. He said, look, we can't continue like this. Since we have friction among us, what we need to do is to sit down and come up with something that can actually add a voice to the African people. And that was what actually led to the formation of the OAU, Organization of African Unity. OAU. That was actually what led to the formation of OAU on the 25th of May, 1963. All right. Now, quickly, I want us to go back, trace the history of AU. Like I told you that the history of AU can actually be traceable through the history of OAU. Now, let's go through some of the, I would say the following initiatives paved way for the birth of the African Union. One, the extraordinary session of heads of government in 1999, that is in Libya, which established an African Union. Okay, now there was a session, there were different plans, there were different programs that actually led to the formation of the African Union. One of it was the extraordinary session of the heads of government in 1999. During this session, Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki of South Africa and Abdel Sisi of Algeria were given the mandate to negotiate the cancellation of the debt of Africa. Around that period, the debt of Africa was set to be very, very high. In fact, 21% of the IGR, that is internally generated revenue, of the African continent was actually used for the servicing of what? External debt. Just imagine that 21% of your income is used for servicing debts, external debts. was not actually good for Africa. In fact, it was not good for a start. By that, if it had continued, it would have actually led to the complete, these territories that were liberated will go back to colonialism. But these two countries were given the opportunity to negotiate for the cancellation of the debts of African territories or the newly independent countries of Africa. And it was during this session that the first head of General Assembly was actually proposed, and Thabo Mbeki was actually the first head of General Assembly of the AU. He was the first, even though his tenure started in 2002. We're coming to that, we're just trying to trace the history. Now, another initiative was the Lome Summit of 2000, which adopted the Constitutive Act of the Union signed on 11 July 2000. Now, the Constitutive Act is actually a document that stipulates, that enshrines, that spells out the objectives of the AU. This document was actually put together to pave way for the formation of the AU. Another initiative was the Lusaka Summit of 2001, which actually drew the roadmap for the implementation of the AU. Now, during the Lusaka Summit of 2001, the roadmap, the vision and the mission of the AU was actually outlined, was actually brought to limelight. And one of it, like as I'm talking now, AU has actually brought what is called Agenda 2063. In fact, in 2019, the General Assembly sat down and brought up the agenda for 2063. Just imagine. Now, how many years? By 2063, some of us, maybe, I don't know, some of you students, I know you would have been very old also. 63, add 63 to your 18 years now, you will be very old. Already, there is this agenda, is on ground. It's part of the Lusaka Summit that was actually drawn in 2001. One of the initiatives. The last one is the Durban South Africa Summit of 2002, which launched the AU and convened the first assembly of the heads of states of the African Union. Now, I may not say so much because I need to talk on this first before coming back to this. All right. Now, let's just look at it. We say the 13th to 19th July 2001 summit, which was the 37th summit of the Organization of African Unity, was the last which brought the 38-year-old organization, OAU, to an end, and the establishment of the African Union, AU, on 8th January 2002, with 40 African countries present in Durban, South Africa. Now, let me quickly go back and see what I'm trying to say. The Durban, South Africa Summit 2002 launched the AU and convened the first assembly of the heads of states of the African Union. All right, so it was during this initiative that finally AU actually came into being. And it was a summit that took place in South Africa, Durban, to be precise. 40 independent African countries were present during that meeting. All right, and so the formation of AU was on the 8th January 2002 with 40 independents. Let's go to the objectives of AU quickly. One of them is commitment to democracy and fundamental rights. The AU set on ground as one of its objectives is to ensure that the fundamental rights of people of Africa is actually ensured. 2, economic development of Africa, seeing that it is a newly liberated, territory. It needs to actually be developed. economically, politically, socially, culturally, it needed to be developed. And one of the key things that the AU actually put on ground is to ensure that the economy of the African territory was actually developed. Even though, as I'm talking now, that most of the African countries are still underdeveloped. So what does that actually tell you? Well, we'll get to see it maybe when we come to other things. Eradication of poverty, disease, and illiteracy. Just to add on what I've just said now. In fact, one of the things that AU have actually put on ground is to ensure that African countries are completely, they are free of poverty, diseases, and illiteracy. Bringing up different programs to ensure that the African man actually enjoys himself and enjoys even the African, provisions. Now, these things, I don't know whether, but well, to some extent, they are still working. Is that okay? To end conflict in Africa, to end conflict, frictions among different, territories in Africa. In fact, it's one of the objectives of AU to ensure that all these African countries solve their problems amicably, sit down, resolve their differences. We still have wars in Africa, but it was more than what we have today, because AU have actually put down some modalities to foster deeper and stronger social, political, and economic integration among member countries. One of the things that they have actually come up with is to ensure that people from different countries of Africa can actually move to other African countries freely and trade without any problem. Harmonize, in fact, it has to do with harmonizing our political, our economic, our social activities. In fact, that's one of the objectives or aims of the African Union, to develop and introduce a single currency for Africa. As I'm talking, day before yesterday, Buhari was cautioning, ECOWAS that they should look into the issue of single currency. Now, of course, any moment from now, ECOWAS will come up with a single currency. And that should also tell you that Africa very, very soon will come up with a single currency. What is that telling you? Well, I don't know, but, well, that's one of the objectives, to promote and defend African common position on issues of interest to the continent and its people. Now, this objective is to make African countries to speak with one voice when it comes to international issues, so that it will add weight to the voice of Africa when it comes to different international issues. All right, let's quickly just look at the achievement of African Union. One, development of vision and mission of the organization. AU was able to develop the mission and the vision of the organization. Like I've told you, that already we have Agenda 2063. So it was not an international organization that was without vision. It had mission and it had vision, even for the organization. And let's move to the next one. Its objectives give it international recognition because of how articulated the objectives of African Union are. It gives African Union recognition among different international organizations, most especially the United Nations. Development of a peace and security architecture through the establishment of a Peace and Security Council. Now, the Peace and Security Council is one of the organs of the AU. Now, to tell you that AU is committed to ensuring that there is stability, there is peace, in the different African territories, it now established or come up with the Peace and Security Council, and to ensure that the different conflicts in African soil is actually handled without much struggle. Development of African Court on Human and People's Rights, ACHPR. Now, the African Court on Human Rights is actually how African territories to settle their differences through arbitration, coming to the court to settle different territorial problems that may actually come up. Like I've told you, during the little problem, the little friction Nigeria was having with Cameroon, which was actually settled by International Court of Justice. AU also believes in that and set up a court for Africa that can actually help to arbitrate, or to settle differences between the different African countries. Ability to sustain the organization from inception 2002 to 2020 in the face of many obstacles. I will tell you, even on camera, that there are countries in the West that are not ready. They don't support this kind of organization because they know that this can actually be an impediment, can be an obstacle to whatever they want to achieve in Africa. So, the ability to sustain the organization from inception is a huge achievement of the AU. Like I've told you earlier on, that we have Agenda 2063. So, to tell you that this organization has actually come to stay, it has tried all the way amidst obstacles and hindrances. Having discussed the achievements of African Union, let's look at some of the problems of the African Union. Inability to establish the African Investment Bank because of financial problem. Now, financial problem has been recorded as one of the problems of the African Union. And there is no organization, even local organization, that can actually run successfully without finance. Money is actually needed. Finance has actually been one of the problems of the African Union. It lacks trained troops to effectively intervene in all African conflicts. Now, from some of the objectives, or one of the objectives that we have actually outlined and also discussed, we've said that one of the objectives of the AU is to eradicate, and to be able to handle the issue of conflict among African countries. Now, AU is not having trained troops that will be able to ensure that that objective that they have set in place is actually realized. So this is one of the problems of the AU. Lack of trained troops to effectively intervene in all African conflicts. As I'm talking, we still have African countries that are at war with one another, frictions with different territories of Africa. And it's because of this problem of AU. Language barrier is still a huge problem of the AU. Going back to the objective of AU, one of it says that AU is hoping to have a single language, single official language. Up to now, as I'm talking, even ECOWAS has not actually come to terms with this talkless of AU. Well, just as we've established before that, AU already has set modalities for 63 years as I'm talking now, because 2019 came up with an agenda 2063. But as I'm talking now, language problem is still a huge problem to African Union. Important institutions like the African Parliament has not been established yet. Now, some of these institutions that will actually help AU to achieve most of their objectives and aims, and to also ensure that the vision that they have envisioned comes to pass as they have actually put down, have not actually been established. And one of it is the African Parliament. And this is also a huge problem. Many African countries are still very needy or poor. We've also said in one of the objectives that it is the hope and the desire of African Union to eradicate completely poverty, disease, and illiteracy in Africa. But like I've observed to you students, that up to now, as we're still talking, even in Nigeria, we still have poor people. In fact, very, very needy people. People that are even living below poverty level. So, it's another problem that AU is still facing. foreign interests and pressures are still very strong on the continent. Taking us back to what we've discussed on colonialism, different countries of Africa that were colonized are still paying allegiance to their former colonial masters. Now, apart from that, because of backwardness economically, technologically, scientifically, and otherwise, most of these African countries are still depending on the advanced countries. And that has actually led to mounting of pressures, exerting pressures on some of these African countries to succumb and to give in to some of the advices that may not actually be the best to the African countries. The aim to have single African currency is not yet achieved. Just as we've observed the issue of language barrier, we still have the problem of single currency. Buhari, within the week, was asking ECOWAS to consider the issue of this single currency, and he was telling them that they should be very careful and see how that can actually be achieved. Now, ECOWAS also has this problem. It has been the hope of ECOWAS that it will have a single currency. AU, being the bigger brother, also has actually put down modalities to ensure that Africa come up with a single currency. But that has not been achieved yet, and still a problem. All right, summary. We have actually looked at the origin of AU, and we trace it from OAU, Organization of African Unity, and we look at the history of OAU and the four initiatives that actually gave birth to AU. And then we look at it, we discuss the achievements of AU. We've also looked at the problems of AU, which is the last thing we discussed in this lesson. The last thing we do in this lesson is to give you an assignment. And your assignment is to explain the main two functions of these organs. One, the assembly, that is the General Assembly of the AU, and then the Executive Council, the Court of Justice, the Permanent Representative Committee. Just two functions, just explain briefly. And when we meet in our next lesson, we'll continue from it. Just send it to this contact. Send your assignment to this contact. And when we come in our next lesson, we'll see how we can discuss the answers together. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Stay safe and God bless you. Thank you.